Revelation 9. And it was given, now these are the Saracens, it was given that they should not kill men, but that they should be tormented. Men would be tormented by the scorpion's tails. In the fifth trumpet, the Saracens would just sting. And men would say, I want to die, but we can't die. And these scorpions were just stinging them. But when you get to the sixth trumpet, there's a more potent weapon there because men are killed. Here, men would not be killed with the Saracens, but when you come to the next trumpet, the Turks, men would be killed. So there's an interesting contrast, and we'll show you what that means in a moment. But they would torment these Saracens, and they would torment for 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. So picture what John sees. All of these yellow turbaned, men-faced, hair, women flow back there, teeth like lion, charging across the desert like locusts. Now, when you look at the word scorpion, it's very interesting when you try and picture what John saw, because when you have a look at history, the Saracens employed in their military operations formidable missiles which they called scorpions. These were catapults. So John saw all of these warriors on horses like swarms of locusts, and they're charging on and they're carrying behind them these catapults. Now, John didn't know what that was. He just saw it as a very powerful sting. The Arabs actually, or the Saracens, called this warfare, this weapon of air, they called them scorpions. Now, an Arab writer speaks of them in 1249. He says this, and we quote, "The scorpions, surrounded and ignited by nitrated powder, glide along like serpents with a humming noise. And when exploded, they blaze brightly and burn. Now," he says, "to behold the matter expelled was as a cloud extended through the air, which gave forth a dreadful crash like thunder, vomiting fire on every side and breaking down, burning and reducing all things to ashes." These people were very impressed with this machine of war. They were awed by it. Now, what they used to do, they had these catapults, and they got these vessels, these crude vessels that had open mouths, and they filled in them this crude oil, and they added to it this thing that they called Saracen fire. And so when they flung the catapults with these crude vessels of crude oil and Saracen fire, when they hit the ground, they just went woof like napalm. So when it hit water or when it hit the earth, it would just spread. No wonder they said like a dreadful crash like thunder, vomiting fire on every side. And so when they threw them, because they had these open mouths, there was this belching of smoke and fire that was coming out of them. So you could see them coming, and you knew what you were in store for. Now, when you have a look at the dictionary definition of a scorpion, it's quite interesting. After you have a read about the little creature that stings you if you're sleeping outside, in Australia particularly, you then read the dictionary definition. It says, now, the scorpion is an ancient form of ballista. So it's a ballistic missile, you see. So it's an ancient form of ballista or catapult for hurling stones. So in our dictionary, we can look up the word scorpion and see what John saw was being towed behind these horses. They had the Saracen fire, this burning crude oil mixed with secret chemicals to intensify the burning. And John saw that and said, oh, that is a powerful sting. But what we find is that they were going to sting for 5 months. Now, there's something interesting in our Bible, because we've got here in verse 5, many of you would have this in your margins, I'm sure, but in verse 5 it says that these Saracens, these children of the desert, would sting for 5 months. Then, of course, you compare this with verse 10, because in verse 10 you have it repeated, you see. So verse 10, chapter 9, we have, they had tails, catapults, flinging this Saracen fire. They had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. So we've got 5 months in verse 5, we've got 5 months in verse 10. We've got 2 lots of 5 months. Now, God could have said they're going to hurt men for 10 months and be done with it, but he didn't. He made sure that in the record it would be written 5 months and 5 months, periods of the book of Revelation. Now, we know that a Jewish month has got 30 days. Now, there are 30 days in a Jewish month. This is 5 months. So 5 multiplied by 30 is how many days? It's 150 days. Now, on a day for a year principle, Ezekiel 4 verse 6, on a day for a year principle, 150 days is 150 years. So what God says is that these Saracens are going to torment and torment and torment for 2 lots of 150 years. 300 years these Saracens would do their bit with their tails like scorpions, and they did. History tells us that from AD 636 to AD 936, the Saracens ruled supreme. The Islamic Empire ruled by the Saracens. 300 years. 5 and 5. Why didn't God just say they would sting men for 10 months? Well, these are locusts, and locusts are only active for 5 months of the year. So God says the locusts are active. Yes, the locusts are really active, and they're active 300 years. I think it's amazing. So all through the record, God shows how it meets the natural symbol, or the symbol that he gives to us. 5 months and 5 months, 300 years. Abu Bakr was the lifelong friend of Muhammad. He was the first caliph. He was the Sunni. He was the one that was chosen so that he was the best man for the job. He took over the reins of Muhammad, and these locusts are charging into battle with their catapults on the back. He used to rev his soldiers up. Now, this is what he said to them. He said, now, before you go into battle, he says, now remember, you're always in the presence of God. You're always on the verge of death. You're always in the assurance of judgment and the hope of paradise. He says, though, avoid injustice and oppression, but let not your victory be stained with the blood of women or children. Destroy no palm trees, burn no fields of corn, cut down no fruit trees, do not do any mischief to cattle, only such as you kill to eat. But this Abu Bakr, this captain of the faithful who's jeering up his locusts with their yellow turbans and teeth like lion, he says, now look, as you go on, you'll find some religious persons who live retired in monasteries and propose to themselves to serve God in that way. We'll leave them alone, they're monks. But you will find another sort of people that belong to the synagogue of Satan, who have shaven crowns, Catholics. He says, be sure you cleave their skulls and give them no quarter till they either turn Mohammedans or pay tribute. This man, Abu Bakr, was not a reader of Revelation chapter 9, but he was quoting Revelation chapter 9 because he was quoting Revelation 9 and verse 4. Of the locusts it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. What an amazing thing. And those men that did not have the seal of God in their foreheads, but had the mark of the beast, Catholics. And so here were the caliphs, here were the Saracens, and they had the key to the tunnel, or the shaft, that led to the very centre of these men who had shaven crowns. The Catholics, they wanted that abyss, full of shaven, crowned individuals, full of men who had the mark of the beast. Is the Bible inspired, or is it not? Now, we've been saying, as we've been going through Revelation chapter 9, as this fifth trumpet and then subsequently the sixth trumpet, they are all about God's judgments on the particular third of the empire. So the Saracens swarmed out of the pit, determined to take this area that was dominated by the shaven, crowned individuals who had the mark of the beast. But God says, no, that area there and that area there is not for you Saracens. The caliphs wanted all three parts converted to Islam, but God had deemed otherwise. Note the comparison here. Now, this is all about the scorpion's tail just stinging and tormenting versus what's coming next with respect to killing. Have a look at the comparison between verse 5 of Revelation 9 and verse 18. What an amazing thing this is. Now, Revelation 9 and verse 5. And to them, to the Saracens or to the scorpions, it was given that they should not kill. They got scorpions' tails, but they should just torment men for 150 years and 150 years, 300 years. Because in verse 6 it says, in those days of the stinging of these scorpion tails, these catapults, if you like, men will seek death, and they won't be able to find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. What happened? These Saracens came around determined to find a route into Europe. And the Saracens came around here, and they came to Constantinople. And they were constantly bombarding Constantinople with these catapults. They were trying to get Constantinople, and they were bringing pressure on people, but they were not able to kill politically the very jewel in the crown that stood for Christianity in the Eastern Empire. Constantinople was the bastion of Christianity in the Roman world. And they couldn't get it, the Saracens. They just tormented and tormented. And the men were saying, we want to die. Go away. Stop stinging us. They said, we will. But you've got to convert to Islam. They said, we can't. We're Catholics. We'll keep stinging you. And they said, go away. Can we do a deal? Can we parley over this? Yes, Be converted to Islam and we'll stop stinging you. They said, we can't. We're Catholics. Well, we'll keep biting you. And they wanted to die. But they had to give up their religion and they wouldn't. But when the Turks came, there was no sting, oh boy, and there was no just hurting or tormenting. Because you have a look at this verse, verse 18. It's not tormenting now as it was in verse 5. In verse 18, by these three was the third part of men killed. What the Saracens could not do but just torment, the Turks came in and took Constantinople and took the very jewel in the crown, if you like, of the representation of Christianity in the East. It's an amazing contrast between verse 5 and verse 18. So we come to the sixth trumpet, or the second woe trumpet. There's something worth noting before we look at the detail of a few verses before us, and that's this. The sixth trumpet is in two parts. From verse 13 to the end of the chapter is a first portion of a two-portioned judgment. The second half of the sixth trumpet begins in Revelation chapter 11. How do we know that? We just turn across to Revelation chapter 11 and we read verse 14. You see, we're dealing with the second woe trumpet from verse 13 to the end of chapter 9. But when you come to Revelation 11, this is when it finishes. So Revelation 11 and verse 14, the second woe is past. Now what God does in this record here, in the latter half of chapter 9, he says, I am going to bring my judgments upon the Hellenic East. I'm going to bring my judgments on this part of the Eastern Roman Empire. This will form the first part of the sixth trumpet. But then when you get to Revelation 11, God then swings his judgmental searchlight from the east over to the west. So when you start reading Revelation 11, you then pick up the second half of the sixth trumpet. That's why you read, the second woe is past, there in Revelation 11 and verse 14. Now what about chapter 10? Well, right in the middle of the first and second part of the sixth trumpet, latter part of chapter 9, and those earlier parts of chapter 11, what God does right in the middle of that sixth trumpet, or that second woe trumpet, he gives us a vision of the future. So he takes us into the future in the 10th chapter of Revelation. And that's what Revelation typically does. It gives you a portion of what's happening, and then God takes us into the future to encourage the brothers and sisters who had undergone these awful judgments. We're lifted up with the knowledge that soon this will be ended. Soon this will be over. And then God reverts back and continues those judgments. So there you have chapter 10 sandwiching between the first part and the second part of the sixth trumpet, or the first part and second part of the second woe trumpet. Now let's have a look at the sixth trumpet. Revelation chapter 9, and we read in verse 13, and the sixth angel sounded. And verse 14 says, say to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. Now what happened is that these four angels, or these four judgments, were really four waves of Turkomans. So you had these Turkoman tribes that swept across from the east, from Mongolia and from China and from Siberia. And they swept across, right across, and would do awful damage to the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And they came in four specific waves. You first of all had the Seljuks. The founder of the Seljuk Turkoman tribe, his name was Seljuk. In fact, the grandson of Seljuk, this fellow's name, and he's important, we're going to pick him up in a minute, his name was Togrul Beg. So Togrul Beg was a Seljuk. He was the grandson of the man called Seljuk. Now, they were the first wave of Turkomans that came into this area here. And as they came in, they swept the Saracen Islamic Empire to one side, but really they embraced Islam. The Turks took Islam further than what the Islamic Empire had done, so they embraced Islam and became Muslims, as we know. Now, this Togrul Beg, who was the grandson of this man called Seljuk, what he did, he came into Baghdad. Baghdad was the capital of the Islamic Empire. So in comes Togrul Beg, and he says to the Caliph in Baghdad, he said, listen, I'm here now, so you know who's in charge? He said, look, stand to one side, I'm not going to kill you. He said, just stand to one side, you can be the figurehead, of your faith. I am in charge, says Togrul Beg. And by the way, where's your daughter? Okay, I'll marry her. So he marries the Caliph's daughter, just to cement and let him know that he was in charge. Now that's important, because when Togrul Beg came in, when he married the Caliph's daughter and took control of the Islamic Empire, he determined on a course to take Constantinople. But he never took it. A Seljuk did not take it, an Ottoman did. And I want to show you the years and the months that it took. And look at the Bible with respect to prophecy. It is unbelievably, well, it is not, it's believable, but it's amazing. So the Seljuks came in, followed by the Moguls, or the Mongols under Genghis Khan's sovereign ruler. Now the Mongols, they were a dirty people. They were a horrible people. They came in and they just devastated everything. They burnt, they just looted, they pillaged. They did not do nice things because, of course, the Saracens were very refined. But after a while, the Mongols started to behave themselves, and then they started to build and they started to add to what they had previously destroyed. And then they started to spread Islam as well. Now, the Tartars and the Ottomans came in as a wave together. So Seljuks first, in the Mongols, and then the Tartars and the Ottomans. Now, we read that, loose the 4 angels which are bound by. Now, the authorised version says in. It should be by. So not loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates, but correctly bound by. And there they are. So as these Turkomans came in, they assembled on the border of the Euphrates, ready for the wave after wave after wave of invasion into the Roman Empire. But note Revelation 16 and verse 12, because in Revelation 9, God lets loose a flood. So a great flood emerges from the river Euphrates. It's not a flood of water, it's a flood of horses. But when you have a look at Revelation 16 and verse 12, the reverse of what was instigated or commissioned in Revelation 9. Revelation 9 sees a flood coming from the Euphrates. The Turkish power came in and grew. But Revelation 16 is the withdrawal of that Turkish power. Revelation 16 and verse 12, and the 6th angel poured out his vial on the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up. Revelation 9, the flood begins. And the Turks then become a scourge to the world and develop their great Ottoman Empire. And in Revelation 16, God then dries that Ottoman Empire up. First started in Revelation 9, and it's to end or dry up in Revelation 16. But notice this. Then in Revelation 16, it's the 6th vial. In Revelation 9, it's the 6th trumpet. It's not a bad little exercise. If you want to do a little Bible marking or a Bible study, have a look at the comparisons between the 1st trumpet, the 2nd trumpet, the 3rd trumpet, the 4th trumpet, and then look at the 1st vial, the 2nd vial, the 3rd vial, and the 4th vial, and they are the same. The 1st trumpet was on the earth, the 1st vial was on the earth, the 2nd trumpet was on the sea, the 2nd vial was on the sea. You know what that tells me? That if when I study the trumpets and I'm thinking, well, really, is this Alaric and the Visigoths? Have I really got it right? Well, then go and look at the 1st vial. God repeats it, deals with the same area in a different historical context, absolutely cementing in our mind we are on rock-solid ground to make sure that we can reinforce that this interpretation or this prophecy that we have in Revelation is in fact consistent and God working through the historical events of the age in which different brothers and sisters lived.